Hey, what's going on, you guys? This is book review number 11. The second one I'm doing today. And I guess let's just get straight to it. The book I'll be reviewing today is The Fatal Shore by Robert Hughes. I think there's a subtitle to this. The Fatal Shore, the Epic of Australia's Founding. Now, I read this book about 3 years ago, so forgive me if my memory is a little dusty. But to begin with, this is not a travel book. This is a historical book, as the Epic of Australia's Founding would imply. It also doesn't necessarily focus on one event like Bativia's Graveyard did, or one person like The Last Empress did, but really focuses on the broadness of Australia's founding. Well, anyway, just a little bit of history if you don't know. Australia was the last continent on Earth to be founded, to be discovered. Really, it had been kind of breached in the late 1500s, early 1600s, by sailing ships going to Asia, but that was just sort of like shipwrecks and hitting off the coast and kind of minor explorations of small parts of its coast. But really, it wasn't until around the American Revolution, around 1860, a little bit before the American Revolution, but around the time of the American Revolution, that the country was even explored extensively, and that was by Captain Cook. He went all up and down the shore. Now, what I found pretty amazing was almost, not the second, because we're talking in broad historical time period here, but almost to the second, aka within 10 years of Captain Cook. Can't remember his first name, but you know who Captain Cook is. Of Captain Cook charting the Australian coastline, the first settlers were sent to Australia, but they weren't sent, and this is the very first settlers, not a few settlers and then they changed into this, but the very first settlers that were sent into Australia were sent in, I think, 1886. I should know these dates because I've read the book, but it's been a while. 1888 or something like that? No, 1788. 1888 would be like the Taft administration. I don't know. Okay. So yeah, it's 1780s. Forget all that stuff about the 1800s. 1780s. That including Captain Cook, he was like in the 1760s. That it got me off. That the first settlers were sent there, and they were sent as convicts from Great Britain. Now, what I found interesting about this time period was this was kind of in the very brief time period between when there was essentially no standards for criminals, aka they threw you in a dungeon and you died, to sort of theories about modern containment that happened fairly quickly and actually fairly shortly in America after its founding, like in the early 1800s. But during that brief span between the two, the nations of Europe, particularly Great Britain, though also examples exist in France and the Netherlands, places like that, they would send their criminals to remote overseas colonies. And that, my friends, is essentially the history of Australia's founding. There were free settlers, but it tended to be that the convicts would come in and live in the most deprived of circumstances under essentially military rule by whatever you could pretty much call them despot governors were installed in Australia at that time period. I'm going to ignore that phone call. Kind of a all right, let's take some little coffee while we're listening to that. This might be a little long video, so professionalism here. Man, this one's just going wrong from the start. Okay, so where was I? Oh, the convicts would be sent in under the most depraved of circumstances, kind of develop a meager community that would allow settlers to move in later. And often these convicts were subleased to the settlers to act pretty much as slaves, or most optimistically, minimally hired labor. So yeah, I mean, that was really interesting. You know, you have both the two big ones to begin with were the colony off Hobart in Tasmania, or as it was then known, Van Diemen Land. I can't remember the exact name of it, but that was a big colony, and then the penal colony. And the other big one was in Sydney. And then, of course, you had kind of like the colonies that were branches off that, be it the depravity of Norfolk Island, which is this little tiny island, like 300 miles off the coast, where nothing exists there, where they sent the most hardcore criminals because they needed to punish them, essentially, or at least they felt they needed to punish them. You know, the settlement of Brisbane. What were some other ones? Port Macquarie on Tasman Island as a to get the worst of the Tasman prisoners across the island on Van Diemen Land, you know, Tasmania. And even it covered the history of Perth, which, after all, the convict slave labor had been outlawed in the eastern provinces, Victoria, Tasmania, New South Wales, Queensland, in all the way up to like the 1850s. So we're talking about like a 70-year time span here of colonization, or penal colonies in the east existed for like 20 more years in the west, and essentially what was the founding of the city of Perth, which is once again a major city in the Australian nation. Really, the impression that I got about the daily lives in the book was not only how deprived they were, but also how much the military, or you know, the jailers essentially of Australia, just loved whipping their convicts. Like, it almost seems a little sadistic. It's just how much punishment they loved instilling, and it wasn't even necessarily like a genocide or something like that, like just killing. I mean, I guess the example would be blacks in the United States, but I mean, it wasn't that bad. It was also didn't really have to do with like slaves or forcing people. Well, there obviously was forced labor, but it wasn't like the convicts were seen strictly as a source of revenue. That was one of the things that they were used for, like blacks were in the South. But it seems like some of the people just really loved whipping these convicts, which I guess that's sort of how the sense of, is it matemanship or mateship exists in Australia today, is under deprived circumstances. Well, you can't trust Big Brother. You can't trust the man on top because they're going to hurt you. So you develop a, as they call it, tall poppy syndrome, and really just trust your mates, your ones next to you. Well, anyway, I think that's all I'm going to say about this book. Once again, it's not really like a travel literature, but just the breadth, the width and breadth. The width and breadth of the stories involved here, are just amazing, and really paints a picture of, we often hear the stereotype of Australians as convicts, but very few of us actually know the history and can really kind of back up our broad, somewhat, well, not ignorant, but just somewhat broad or didactic claims with specific examples or historical evidence, or really talk just about the stories at all, the stories of these people that were sent thousands and thousands of miles across the world from a homeland that very few of them would ever see ever again, and just the psychological aspect that created in the prisoners, both in the forced punishment, I guess you would say, of their captors, as well as just the punishment of space and lack of future. It's really quite amazing, what these people went through. So anyway, it's highly recommended. As with any of these books, there are a lot more stories that I did not get to. This is a particularly egregious example of just because of how much is covered in this book. But yeah, highly recommended. The Fatal Shore by Robert Hughes. If you have any interest in the history of Australia, this is like, anybody that knows anything knows that this is like the must-read book for the history of Australia. So, there you go. Fatal Shore. I believe that is Port Jackson, aka Sydney Harbor, that the first ship, I think is the Endeavour, is landing in to drop its first convicts off in what would later become Sydney, Australia. So, anyway, thanks for sticking with me, you guys. Hopefully I can get the viewership up a little bit, and within the next few days I should have a few more books in the hopper and just more material. So, see y'all later. Bye.